efforts over the last few decades. I mean, they're such scary things now. If you read the media, how do they just morph like that? What in the world's going on with guns?
Well, we need to, when we see what's going on in the media, we need to be very, very savvy about what's going on, because there is an active effort to manipulate the public with high-profile stories of mass murder and all of this sensationalism. Most people, I had a conversation just the other night with someone, and she said, well, what are we going to do with this spiraling, this violence? The level of violence is just spiraling out of control, and it'll be, just guns in the streets anytime, just everywhere. And I said, well, tell me about that. Explain to me how that growth in violence has been. Like, for example, how much more violence do you think we have in, our violent crime in the United States over like 20 years ago? What would you guess it is? Oh, it's probably 10 times more. It's probably, she didn't know. But she'd heard all the media reports about all this violence. And I said, did you know it's about 10%? And it's, depending on how you measure it, it's 10 to 20% of what it was 20 years ago. Now, that's not to say that all that violence is acceptable or we should be happy with that level of violence, but it puts things into perspective. If the public thinks that there's an epidemic of violence, you hear that language, an epidemic of violence, and yet, in reality, the violence has gone down. Are we being manipulated? I think the answer, unquestionably, is yes. The media is manipulating us. The reality is, even with school shootings, the reality is, when you look at the numbers, there's no epidemic of school shootings. Now, school shootings are tragic. No question about it. We're going to do what we can to prevent those events and to try and keep guns out of the hands, perhaps, of people that shouldn't be having them. But school shootings were a really big deal back in the 20s. People know this. I mean, that was the peak for when school shootings were happening. We still have school shootings, and we should do what we can to stop those from happening. But if people think there's an epidemic of these things, and they think that this is spiraling out of control, when in fact it's not, that should tell you something about what the media is doing to manipulate the statistics and manipulate the public. What they're trying to do right now, and I hope that I can get across to you, take away nothing else from anything I said, understand that there's an active strategy right now going on, and it works like this. They know that they can't just come after all the guns at once. They know they can't say, all right, everybody come bring in your semi-automatics, bring in your shotguns, bring in your revolvers. They know that would be a complete non-starter. They know that. They're at least savvy enough to understand that. But what they've settled on is a strategy of saying, let's try and target a few guns. Let's pick out a certain category. So right now what they're trying to do is to say that semi-automatic rifles. And when you hear the word assault weapon, that's really just a euphemism for a semi-automatic rifle. The same kind of rifle has been around for 100 years, more than 100 years. But they try and marginalize that gun and make that gun scary and that gun somehow exotic. And they want to make that thing and say, we're not coming for all the guns, don't worry. We're not, and it's as if they're saying, well, don't you guys worry, we're just getting the gypsies. When the Nazis came along, we're just getting the gypsies. Don't worry, you're good, you're good. Oh no, we're just getting the radicals. Don't worry about it. We're just getting the radical communists. We're getting them. Don't worry, you're good, you're good. Well, guess what? By the time you step up, it's like the saying. When they came for me, I wanted to do something, but there was no one to speak for me. The same thing happens. They're trying to do the same thing with the guns. And you need to understand this. So when they say, well, we're just going to take that, you don't need that gun. You can always have this other gun. You don't need that gun. That's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to marginalize the guns that are semi-automatic rifles by using this tactic of calling them assault weapons, even though there's no real difference in the way they operate between an assault weapon that has a collapsible stock, or a semi-automatic rifle that has a collapsible stock, versus a semi-automatic rifle that does not. There's no difference. No one's dying from a collapsible stock that, maybe once in a while, but it's really not a more dangerous gun. There's a media manipulation going on, and you need to let even gun owners are not aware of this. And actually, I had a police officer set me straight one time at a gun show, because when I was young, I said, well, maybe people don't need those assault weapons. Boy, he set me straight in no uncertain terms. He was a uniformed police officer. He said, let me tell you something, son. this is what they're up to. And he set me straight, and he was right. And we need to set our neighbors straight about what's afoot here. It's a media manipulation to try and get one type of gun in, because I guarantee you, once they've got semi-automatics off the table, they'll be coming for the next thing. It'll be Saturday Night Special, which is what they call revolvers.
Thank you, Mr. Mandelson.
Sorry,
so what basically, that was very good, but what I'm learning is apparently there's something scarier out there than the guns themselves, is what you're saying. Now, we have, and I'm sure it hasn't escaped your notice, but we have a room full of taxpayers here. Can I have one volunteer from the audience come up and just tell us, what do you expect for your tax dollars in terms of law enforcement? Just in like 30 seconds. Just one person come up. What do you expect from your police officers and your sheriff's deputies in terms of return on your investment for your tax dollars? Just one volunteer. She said protection. Susan?
I would expect to keep the peace and to respond to emergencies that arose.
Okay, so if an emergency arose right now in this very room and you called 911, Susan, as a former sheriff's deputy,
Still there.
how long, and I've seen these sheriff's deputies and police officers, I used to be one, drive really fast up and down I-30. This right here, they could be off that exit in here in a minute. So how fast would they get here?
Not fast enough.
Back in my day, we used to fly, but we'd get here in ample time. This used to be my beat back in 98 to 2000, and so I had this area for a long time. And when I was down here, served lots of felony warrants, and that's all it was felony warrants. And being said, we had the luxury to have Dallas Police Department to back us up. So if we needed some help out here, I mean, it would rain help through the Dallas Police Department. So that's you asked how long, and that's awful quick on a 911 call. Responses. But can we get back here real quick to what they're doing to the gun world as far as AR? They take the word AR and they say, your AR-15 is an assault rifle. That's what it stands for. They're saying, they claim that AR stands for assault rifle. I want to clarify that. That is not true. The AR was made by a company back in the day. It was Armor Light Rifle made this rifle back then, and so this is a prime example of how they've taken AR and turned it around on us and call it assault rifle. And that is not, it's a semi-auto. It fires one shot at a time. When you press the trigger one time, you get one round out of that. And it's semi-auto, it's not a fully auto, it's not a machine gun, semi-auto weapon, fires one round. And by the way, let's talk about magazines. They want to ban certain counts of magazines. If there's a 20 round, that one AR-15 takes a 20 round or a 30 round magazine. But you can put as many bullets in there, but it's only going to shoot one round at a time. So therefore, I just wanted to clarify, again, AR, meaning they're calling it an assault rifle, but it's made by Armor Light Rifle, which solarized to Colt. And so with that being said, I just wanted to say that about the magazine capacities. Thank you. Sure.
When people tell you that something's an extended capacity or a high capacity magazine, keep in mind that, as she said, the AR, the original model, came with a 20 round, and the newer ones, the normal capacity for that is 30 rounds. So it's not a high capacity, it is the normal capacity is 30 rounds. For my Beretta, the normal capacity is 15 rounds. Now they want to say now that anything over 10 rounds is high capacity. Now they can't explain why that's the right number. And the reason they can't is because they're not going to be happy with 10. Once they get 10, they'll be going for 5. And in some places they're trying to go down for 3, that you can have a magazine, but you can only have 3. The reality is they want to get rid of the gun, and they want to have 1 round per magazine, and then no semi-automatics at all. So when you ask them, what's the right number? If you say that 30 is too many, what is the right number? Well, if they say 10, okay, so you'll be happy with 10. There's no reason that 10 is the right number. It's just something they said.
Isn't their argument that the less bullets that we're able to fire off at a time, the less people can get killed? So it's a good thing to produce these bullets.
And I appreciate that answer. And that is the argument. And that argument might sell to someone who's never fired one of these guns. Because if you have fired one, you know how long it takes to change out a magazine. It takes a fraction of a second. and they will tell you, oh, well, when a guy's changing out his magazine, that's when we're rushing. Is that gonna happen? Are we training people? Because honestly, I believe we would have a lot less of these sorts of shootings if we would train people. If you have an active shooter, your survival rate is gonna be a lot higher if you guys just rush the guy. But we don't train people to do that.
Okay, I want to ask you about a statistic.
I'm sorry, I'm
that,
taking it.
no, it's okay. I want to ask you about a statistic on that first, Pastor Brown.
I think Ken hit on something. I think about a manipulation that's going on in the media. We need to frame that a little bit for you. And there is a dialect that I'm taught here at my church called the Hegelian dialectic. Hegelian dialectic. First, they create the problem, they control the reaction, and then they offer a solution. They create the problem, control the reaction, and offer a solution. This is not something new. This is right out of the Communist Manifesto, and what we are experiencing right now is an exercise of that philosophy, that idea on the public square. And most of us are oblivious to that, and they know that. Let me read this one document to you. It won't take but about 2 minutes.
Why you look at me, Pastor?
No one knew I was looking at you. Now they all know. This is a quote from a guy who was the chairman of the Handgun Control Incorporated in 1976. He said this, I am convinced, quote, I'm convinced that we have to have federal legislation to build on. We're going to have to take one step at a time. The first step is necessarily, given the political reality, going to be very modest. Of course, it is true that politicians will then go home and say, this is a great law. The problem is solved. And it's also true that such statements will tend to diffuse the gun control issue for a time. So then we'll have to strengthen that law, and then again strengthen that law, and maybe again and again. Right now, though, we'd be satisfied not with a half a loaf, but with a slice of bread. Our ultimate goal is total control of handguns in the United States. It is going to take time. My estimate is for about 7 to 10 years. The problem is that it's too slow. The problem is to slow down the increasing number of handguns sold in this country. The second problem is to get them all registered. And the final problem is to make the possession of all handguns and all handgun ammunition, except for military, police, licensed security guards, licensed supporting clubs, and licensed gun collectors, totally illegal. Peter Shields, July 26, 1976. Let me tell you something, men and women. This stuff has been coming at us for a long time. It has metastasized and come to a culmination. It is the Hegelian dialectic being played out on you today. And we need to wake up and need to push back, because our kids have bought it hook, line, and sinker.
How many of you read, I'll come back to you in just a moment. How many of you read the story about Roberta Moore? Roberta Moore. Just a few miles from here. This was on a street at an apartment complex I used to patrol. She was the woman who, this just past January, was murdered in her apartment. The authorities found her body was inside another apartment in the same complex. The police obtained a search warrant for that apartment, picked up the felon living there for questioning. Yeah, Sunday school teacher. Did you know her? I thought long and hard about that. What if Roberta Moore had had a gun to defend herself? Let me ask the panelists, and I'll come back to you on that other issue. Are there people in our society that should not have guns, should not own guns? Anybody want to speak to that?
Yeah, there are people who should not own guns, of course. But how do we determine who they are without impacting those who deserve the right to have a gun? And I think that's part of the Hegelian dialect that the pastor talked about. Those who should not have guns. And I think what they're going to do, they're going to sack us all in that same particular sack. and say that nobody needs to have a gun because over in London, they don't have guns over there where Piers Morgan's from. From what we understand, every time that there was an attempt to take over a country, the first thing they went after were the guns. Hitler went after the guns. I think, who was it, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela also went after the guns. And it's very interesting that I think that what's happening now, they're going after the guns. And then when we haven't even talked about something that you and I talked about earlier, about the fact that our government right now is buying as many bullets as they possibly can. A lot of these hollow point bullets, and you ask Jack Napolitano from the Department of Homeland Security, why are you buying all these bullets? But we need to practice. And you talk to military people, they say, well, look, we don't even practice with hollow point bullets. It sounds like to me they're trying to make sure that you will not be able to afford tyranny. And that's what they have to the whole segment of it. So it's just a big game.
Okay. In the interest of time, and we're going to come back, I know you had a point you wanted to elaborate on, but I'm going to ask our special reporter, Alice Linehan, to come up, and she's going to give a 3-minute special report from the perspective of a mother on God and guns. So please welcome Alice Linehan.
Thank you. Earlier I mentioned that I am a part of an organization called Women on the Wall. And there are 3 key issues that we are taking on with Women on the Wall. Education, national security, and the Second Amendment. And what we are working on doing, and what I want to put into your mind to think about, is how are those 3 issues connected? First, with education. We talked about, Pastor Broden, you talked about, Ken, you talked about manipulation. Manipulation of the media, manipulation within our education system. Just like Pastor Broden, you read that quote from, I think it was 1976. If we look at what's happening in our education system today, the people who are running the education system, the people that are running our country today, were the radicals from the 60s. And right now, there are 45 states across this country who've implemented Common Core curriculum. And I don't want to get off topic, but I implore you to look into Common Core curriculum and who's behind it. And remember, obviously, most of you know the name Bill Ayers, but Linda Darling Hammond. Then in Texas, we're dealing with C-Scope, an online technology curriculum. It plays into that control of the dialogue, control of the narrative. So with Common Core curriculum, with C-Scope, they're getting into our education system and to our children, and they're using our tax dollars to do it. And they're desensitizing them and the political correctness. And so then, as we're taking on the issue of Common Core and C-Scope, we have legislators who are pushing for charter schools. And we think, oh, that's the answer, charter schools. Well, I would say that our charter schools need to have legislation that says that you have to be a U.S. citizen to put a charter school into the United States of America. And right now, there's Senate Bill 2 that if it's implemented and voted on as it's written today, and you know that they vote on things before they read them, but in the state of Texas, it'll open the door, take the cap off of charter schools from 218, something like that, to unlimited. And who's implementing and putting charter schools into our states right now? Fatah Gulen, through the Harmony Science Center. Now think about this. Who are they targeting? Children. but there are certain children that they're targeting. In my school district, as a mom, I can go up to my school board and make sure that they know, and I have a voice, but it's in the inner city communities. They're targeting the Black community. They're targeting the Hispanic community. And I can stay in my little bubble and protect my children, but we're all being controlled because they're manipulating these kids in the inner city. And with the Second Amendment, to bring it down to what we're talking about today, now we're disarming them. And let me tell you, if you don't think it's a national security issue, and if you don't think that this is being done intentionally, the threats that we face today, I don't care if you are a liberal Democrat mom or a conservative Republican mom, we all love our children, and we will all defend our children. And if another 9/11 happens, the people that are trying to harm our country, they don't care what political side we're on. They're wanting to take us all out. So I put that forth to you. That's one of the reasons why I've taken this journey. I think God put Kennard in my life for a reason, and it's to connect these dots in this journey. So I hope that that just kind of stimulates something in your mind as to where we can go with this. Because like I said, we're not going to elect someone to save us. It's Republicans and Democrats who are implementing this legislation.
That's right.
It's going to be you and I, Kennard and I, coming together, talking, and holding all of our elected officials accountable.
One of the other expectations I had for today, and that was an excellent report, was that you would not only meet people, but that you would take some notes and then go do some research. Don't take people's word for it. You shouldn't take the word anyone here, but go do your own research and convince yourself and then test it. Take it on a test drive. You know, one of the speakers I heard in the last few weeks, actually 2 months ago I heard Frank Gaffney speak, and then last week I was pleased to meet Stephen Emerson, and he has the investigative project on terrorism, IPT. I'd encourage you to go read that. There's documented facts about infiltration in our government. And I won't get off on a tangent on that, but since we have an attorney on our panel, I want to ask, and I'll set the stage for this question, and you can elaborate on the previous point you wanted to. Give you a few minutes. By the way, our lunch is now going to be at 1 o'clock, so we have a little bit more time. We're going to have some pizza, so we have about 20 minutes, and I do want to open it up for some questions in here in just a moment. But I'm a member of 2 organizations that I want to mention, and I would encourage you to research these. It's just my opinion, my choice to be involved. But one is Oath Keepers. Go look up Project Sleeping Giant or Operation Sleeping Giant. We've seen examples across the country where local law enforcement. And Susan, did you ever do standby assistance for the feds?
Pardon me?
Did you ever do standby assistance on calls with the federal agents?
The marshals and FBI.
Could you just explain what that means on the microphone? Yeah. Just tell us, what does that mean to do standby assistance for federal agents?
Get me started there.
Well, basically you were a Dallas County Sheriff's Deputy. I was a Dallas police officer. Federal agency is operating in the county, maybe looking for a fugitive.
Right.
They call your supervisors and say, Deputy Rodriguez, you need to go over here.
What would happen is, because the FBI and the U.S. Marshals, they have their jurisdiction is federal, they would come down to our department and just day in, day out, tour of duties, they would ride with us, and what we would do is we would accompany them or vice versa, but we would serve our warrants, and if whatever they had going on, we would help them with that as well. And the jurisdictions being the county sheriffs and the city officers, they tend to come into the jurisdictions and partner up, and that's how we get things done by the law.
Okay. Now, in September, I was able to spend 3 days with Maricopa County Sheriff's Department, in Phoenix area, and I was embedded with the Human Trafficking Task Force, and those were county sheriff's deputies and federal agents. And I can tell you in that department, it was very clear you knew who was in charge, and it wasn't the federal agents. Okay. The sheriff's deputies were in charge of that operation, and they were very cooperative. We lost some respect there, and it was really interesting to see. So, how many of you are aware of that cooperation, that collaboration between local and federal law enforcement? Okay. Now, where that could run into trouble, and where we've seen in the last year, was the case of Brandon Rao, who was a Marine who made some Facebook postings that some people would say were libertarian in nature. And who showed up at his house? Feds. Which agencies? The Secret Service was there, and his local law enforcement. And he was taken from his home. He was put in a facility under what pretense or legal doctrine? It was a mental health warrant. It was basically what we call a warrantless arrest, or an APOW, when I was a Dallas police officer. And a federal judge finally issued an order to free him. And you can go back and Google that. It was last year, about, I don't know, July or August. Pretty strongly worded. And there's some background on that you might want to research on. And I'm told when I went to the second organization, Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officer Association, that's the group founded by Richard Mack. How many of you have heard of Sheriff Mack? Okay. And in a nutshell, he was one of the plaintiffs in the landmark, not Second Amendment, but 10th Amendment case from the 1990s, where the ATF came to the Sheriff's Association in Arizona and dictated to them that they would be doing various checks without any federal funding. And of course, the sheriff said, we're not doing that. It's not constitutional. And then they huddled up and said, what are we going to do to fight this? And a lot of them, as time went by, sort of softened their view and said, you can't fight City Hall. But Sheriff Mack, being the youngest sheriff in Arizona at the time, from Grant County, made the 3-hour drive home, and by the time he hit his driveway, he knew what he had to do. So he had his underdeputy or executive chief deputy. He asked him, does the NRA have a legal defense fund? He said, they sure do. He called the NRA, and they said, we're already working on this. We'd like for you to be part of the case. He said, I want it to be my case. They said, great, who's your attorney? He said, I don't have one. Can you recommend one? And that led to the suit against the federal government, which was during the Clinton administration, the Brady Handgun Act, and that was defeated. The Supreme Court ruled, with Justice Scalia writing the majority opinion on that, basically, in the 10th Amendment context, that the federal government cannot impose a regulatory scheme upon those state officers, those local police officers. It's illegal. So in that regard, he'll make the comment that gun control in America is illegal. So I'd surely like comment from our attorney, but also Pastor Brennan.
I think you're raising a good issue, and I think we need to understand the implication of what he's talking about. And he's talking about federal agents coming into the state and usurping the state's rights or state law. Men and women, it's already happening. The police, I have an article here that's titled The End of the Local Law Enforcement, where Barack Obama signed into law almost 2 to 3 weeks ago the federalization of local police. It's done. It's already through an executive order. Now, we need to resist that. We need to say that's unconstitutional. And what should have happened is John Boehner and Mitch McConnell should have stood up on in the well of the House and said, that executive order is unconstitutional, we must nullify it. And it should have been nullified. It was not nullified. It's an executive order that's in play right now. That the federal government is, through Homeland Security, is beefing up law enforcement agents, departments across the country with ammunition and military-style vehicles. We've got to connect the dots, right? And drones. The Second Amendment under jeopardy, federalization of local police officers, buying of weapons, buying of bullets. What in the earth is going on with our federal government? I submit to you, we are witnessing the preparation of a tyrannical response to our liberties and to our freedoms. And this is not a time for us to come sit around and say, yeah, you know, nice stuff. No, we need to be assembling together and say we need to respond. And the response means that we need to respond to those who are elected to represent our interests. And if they're not responding, then we need to kick them out, or we need to take the next step. And the next step to protect our liberties. The first step is to demand redress. That's what the constitutional defenders are all about. And that's why you need to join us to sign our petition, buy our t-shirts. Help us to get our marketing out into the play. But right here, it's here, I got it right here. It says section 1, the purpose of this order is to maximize federal government's ability to develop local partnerships. Partnership, my foot. They're going to take over. They're using language, and they're going to take over. And we need to stop them. I'm saying we need to connect the dots. I hope that we are trying to, it seems like we got a kind of a shotgun approach here, but your challenge is to synthesize what we're giving to you and connect the dots. Men and women, our liberties are in jeopardy. They hang in the balance. There's one crisis. We're one crisis away from an executive order suspending the Constitution. And if they suspend it, it's not coming back.
And just to show that this didn't occur only under Democrats, Mr. Eugene Ralph, you're from New Orleans, right? What happened after Katrina? I was watching a video on the Oath Keepers website. Some Army troops were actually talking about where they were. Didn't they go into homes and take guns from people?
Yes, fortunately I wasn't there for that, but what happened was there were people who were there who stayed after the storm whose houses did not get flooded. And they were basically walking around with their weapons, and in numerous cases I saw, the videos are still online, where you can see where these are National Guard. These guys probably came from other parts of Louisiana, and they were going in people's homes, and people thinking, you know, this is the police, should be feel safe or whatever. And this old lady, she had to be well into her 60s, maybe even 70 years old, walking around with a 5-shooter. And they tackled this woman, wrestled her to the floor. I mean, it was horrendous. And time after time again, there was another case where a guy he was a merchant, he had a store in the French Quarter. And he decided, well, my goods are going to go to waste, so he said, I'm going to put all my goods out for people in the neighborhood to come by and they can have food, because, you know, they didn't have any electricity for several weeks. So because they were looters, you know, marauders going around and robbing people, basically he said, well, you know, he and his partner stood outside with their weapons on their side, holstered. And the cops, the local New Orleans cops, came by and took their weapons. So, you know, I mean, didn't say go inside with it or whatever. And this was numerous case after case. And this was horrendous.
Who was the president of the United States at that time?
George Bush. It was under the Bush administration, but this was done on the local level. In this particular case, this didn't have anything to do with George Bush per se. He was not issuing those orders. But the thing is, it can happen under anybody. That's the point I think that's being made here.
And the video that I saw was on oathkeepers.org. The other organization I mentioned, cspoa.org. You could watch those videos and see comment on that. Okay, so let me try to wrap my head around this. The gun confiscation's already happened. Mr. Manuelson, can we do anything through the legal process to stop this, or are we just in a type of struggle here?
There's so many things that I wanted to address, but let me just real quick, I'm going to hit on some things that we've skated past. First of all, following up earlier on, when they talk about universal background checks, what they're really talking about is a gateway to universal registration. So make sure you understand that. That's a euphemism for universal registration. There's no way to do universal background checks without universal registration. It's not possible. So when they talk about universal background checks, that necessarily means universal registration. Second of all, if you want to know about anything about what they call the assault weapons ban and its effectiveness, they want to brag on it. The Department of Justice did a study after 10 years of the assault weapon ban in place. You should read it, and at the very least, read your executive summary. It will convince you, and this is the Department of Justice, that was a worthless, meaningless bill that basically did nothing, but it was something that was getting their foot in the door. What can we do? I'll give you an example of what a local city councilman did just the other night up in Rockwall. Michelle Smith, who deserves all of our respect and our applause. She sponsored, and she's not the only one, but there's far too few Texas elected officials that are doing this, and they all need to be doing it. But she sponsored a resolution in the city council, and this is Rockwall. This is not San Francisco, okay? This is not some left-wing place. This is Rockwall, Texas, one of the most conservative places in the state. And she wanted them to say, our police officers do not answer to the federal government. Our local law enforcement work for us. At the most, they might answer to the governor, but they don't answer to the federal government. And that is absolutely the correct statement of the law, as Kirk just got done going through. Your local police officer does not work for Barack Obama. Okay, he doesn't. And so Barack Obama calls him and says, hey, I need you to go arrest this guy. The right answer is, I don't work for you, buddy. You don't cut my paycheck. And to the extent that that the feds try and come in and pretend like they control our local law enforcement, the correct answer is for us to educate our elected officials so that they know that. Because unfortunately, when Michelle put her resolution forward, they wanted to take that statement out. They insisted, in fact, the other members of the city council insisted that she take out the statement that said that they didn't have to answer to the federal government. I'll tell you, any of y'all that know me know I'm a pretty big critic of Rick Perry. But one time when I was really proud of Rick Perry is when George W. Bush, the president, ordered Rick Perry to follow the International Court of Justice decision on the Medellin case. And Ted Cruz was litigating against on behalf of the state of Texas, saying, we don't have to listen to you. President Bush said to Governor Perry, hey, follow what the International Court said, and Perry said, I don't work for you, buddy. We're pulling the switch. Whatever you feel about the death penalty, that was a situation where the state stood up and made very clear that we are a sovereign state. We don't answer to the federal government. The federal government is a creation of the states, not the other way around. So the first thing we can do is educate our elected officials, educate our city attorneys, educate our county attorneys on the law as it exists. That makes it very clear that we don't have a national government, we have a federal government, and there's a big difference.
That's an excellent point, and I was reading a book that talked about the American invention. Just as we have the branches of government which are there to counterbalance and check each other, the spheres aren't really citizens of our state as well as citizens of the United States, and this balancing or these dual spheres, if you will, that's the Republican, not the party, but when you talk about a republic, am I correct in that?
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is we have a federal system of government.
Federal.
And the way that our system works, the Europeans don't quite understand this a lot of times, but our system is almost closer to what they have in the European Union than it is to, like, the United States is closer to that than it is to, say, France. We were originally, as you know, a confederation. Our group was a confederation, and we changed that system, and we went to a stronger assembly, a stronger, higher situation. But the states always retain their own sovereignty, and we cannot forget that. And we cannot forget that localities have autonomy. We cannot ever let that go by the wayside, because going into what we were talking about earlier about how people are being conditioned, people are being conditioned to believe that, well, if there's a problem, the president should solve it, or Congress should solve it. Call your congressman. Well, that's not the right answer. The president is the very last answer, and only when all the other answers, your city council, your county government, your state government, and everybody else have failed you, then maybe. But most of the time, the answer is much more local, and should be.
Here's where I'll give you a couple of homework assignments. Research the term Chief Law Enforcement Officer, or the acronym CLEO. It's actually mentioned in the Prince-Mack decision in the opinion that was written by the decision by Justice Scalia. And it clearly states in the decision, I encourage you to take an hour to read the entire court case decision, but it says that the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of the county in which he or she is elected. And that means no one has supremacy in law enforcement as the chief official in that county, not the president. In that county, they are the chief law enforcement officer. And if federal agents are working in that county, not just for officer safety, they need to inform the local. And you do know that a police chief is generally appointed, not elected by the people. They're generally hired by a non-elected city manager. They're at least 2 levels removed from we the people. That's why I'd encourage you to go to sheriffmac.com, get a copy of his book. One recently he wrote, The Constitutional Sheriff, America's Last Hope, Last Safeguard. It's about the fact that, and we won't get into this topic now, but do some research on interposition. That is where a sheriff will interpose between the unconstitutional law, if you will, and the rights of the people to stop. It's called interposition. And the follow-on action by a state legislature, which is then to address it through nullifying or nullification of an unconstitutional law. At this time, I want to open it up for a question from the audience. Yes, ma'am. Could you come up and...
Well, is it all right if I just...
Just so everyone can hear you.
I'm not.
I'm sorry.
I'm not going to be able to come up there. I'm really loud, so I'm a retired school teacher. Hey, I can do this. Did you, any of you, I imagine several of you, saw on Glenn Beck a week or 2 ago where he had on 4 sheriffs from all over the country, and they brought up this issue about the fact that a sheriff has the ultimate power, and he does not have to bow down to the federal government. He does not have to do what the federal government wants him to do. And we have sheriffs from all over the country. I understand Sheriff Cox the other night said that from Collin County has said, made a statement, and he read it to us, that he got from his lawyer, that he doesn't have to.
He said, my sheriffs or any of my deputies will not enforce any unconstitutional laws, especially those dealing with the Second Amendment.
That's right. And that sheriff in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Sheriff Clark.
Yes, that sort of started that. I give him all the kudos because he really did let people know that, not like she said, that when he has so many miles to cover, there's no way he can cover it. And with the number of deputies that he has, and that 911 cannot help people. They need to have their own guns.
Thank you. I attended a seminar on Wednesday sponsored by the Dallas FBI